Good morning. Thank you for joining us for Overcoming Data Acquisition and Data Preparation Challenges, part of our Winning Ways webcast series with Joe Orangel and Kim Jones from Visual Risk IQ. Visual Risk IQ is an integration partner with Automation Services, the U.S. provider of IDEA data analysis software. I'm Lindsay Falconer with Automation, and I will be moderating the Q&A for today's webcast. If you have any questions, please enter them in the question box on the right side of your screen. We will get to the questions at the end of the webinar. You will earn 1 NASBA CPE credit for attending this webcast. To be eligible for the CPE, you must be present for the entire webcast and answer the 3 polling questions that will be asked throughout the broadcast. We will be recording the webcast and will send the recording and CPE certificates out next week. Joe and Kim, thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Lindsay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the webcast today. As Lindsay mentioned, it's our third in the series. Today we're focusing on data acquisition and data preparation challenges. And good news for me, I'm joined by my partner, Kim Jones, and data acquisition and data preparation is really his strength. So as we go through today's agenda, it's going to be a bit more balanced than the last webinar, and you'll be hearing a lot from Kim. As we had shared with you previously, on a body of knowledge standpoint, we feel that these are the 7 data analytics effort. And today we're really going to focus on that second one, which is data acquisition and data manipulation. To use software like IDEA and visual tools like Tableau and Power BI, we need to have the right data loaded into the tool to answer the brainstorming questions that we talked about last week. Our methodology, as folks have seen, begins with brainstorming, data acquisition, developing queries, reporting, which we'll be covering next week, and then refining and sustaining our queries. I've had Tom Petty's waiting is the hardest part running in my head all week. In our experience, though, it's not the waiting, rather it's the data acquisition and manipulation that is the hardest part of data analytics, and that's why we're going to cover it in depth today. So this methodology.
Yeah, and that waiting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that waiting, Joe, is you kind of know where you want to get. You know those questions, and you're excited about finding out the answers, exploring that data, and then you have to wait while you go through the machinations, both organizational or technical, to get that data into a place where you can actually start to see it. So that's all too often it's a longer waiting game than we think it should be.
Indeed. Just thinking about some work that we did last fall, I think started in September or October, where we had a brainstorming session with one of our regular internal audit clients, came up with a really thoughtful list of accounts payable questions that we wanted to answer, provided a written list of exactly what tables we wanted to get out of their ERP system, and every month for more than 3 months before the first data file was provided. So that audit did lose a little bit of momentum, but we got back on track in finding some real value in that work. What Kim and I did to kind of start today was we began to think about what are the data acquisition challenges that audit teams might encounter. Again, as Kim described, some of them are technical. Some could be organizational as well. So we're going to cover both of those. But as we shared back in our quick start methodology, we want to get the data out of whatever system that it's in and into IDEA. We want to make sure that the data remains secure, that we calculate control totals and balance those control totals back to a source system. We want to be able to import into our analytics tool and do some data validation. As I described last week, we may have certain status codes, X's and A's and 1s and 2s, and we want to make sure that we know what all of those status codes are. We want to be able to deal with data with different data sources and just a whole host of challenges. We want to make good use of the question and answer session. So the folks that are attending the webinar have data acquisition challenges, things that you've run into that you'd like us to cover. Lindsay will be moderating for us, and we'll answer what we can toward the end of the webinar. And we do commit to you that if we can't answer your question in the 60 minutes here, that we'll follow up with you with an email and an offer of a phone call as well, if needed, to answer your data acquisition challenges. As an agenda today, we wanted to describe first some of the organizational obstacles and winning ways that we found in our 10+ years of experience in analytics.
Joe, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what I see on the webinar is still the title slide, so I'm not sure why they're not changing. There you go.
Thank you. Wow. Okay. Just getting used to the software here. As I described, the winning, so folks have missed the past slides. Let me back up and take us through body of knowledge summary, which folks have in the handout, the methodology, and again, focusing on data acquisition and the sequential steps there. And again, in our handouts, we identified a few data problems that we thought folks might routinely encounter, but we want to have questions coming in. And again, this is the agenda that we have for today. Thank you, Kim. Again, we're going to begin with talking about organizational obstacles that we believe folks may occasionally experience. We'll also talk about technical obstacles, things like normalizing data and preparing the data for analysis, particularly with a focus on duplicates. We've got some specific use cases of work that Kim and I have done regarding credit card, procurement card, or travel card data. And we'll also talk about data validation and data security in some detail here. As I described in that accounts payable example, where the audit department did not have access directly to the accounts payable system, but rather had to submit a written request to IT, and then IT was going to prepare the file for internal audit. The point is that the data acquisition and data manipulation challenges that auditors sometimes face can be as much about an organizational obstacle as a technical obstacle, right? Kim, you and I have also experienced, no, you can't have HR data. HR data is sensitive and contains things like employee address and employee phone number. And when the employee signed up to work for our organization, we didn't inform them that we might use the emergency contact information to compare the emergency contact information for a possible fraudulent or fictitious vendor. And because we don't have the employee's permission to do that analysis, we're not going to, the gatekeepers of the data, are not going to make those columns available for internal audits analysis. A little bit of a internal audit charter problem. Does or does not internal audit have the authority to request that data? And again, we'd ask you to think about.
I've been amazed, Joe, in the various shops that we've been to over. In fact, it goes back even to the time we were working together at PricewaterhouseCoopers. That although from the highest levels in an organization, internal audit is given, as you said, the charter to access any and all data within the organization in order to perform their function for the organization, that they nonetheless run into brick walls, firewalls, people who are charged with protecting that data who don't acknowledge the charter. It continues to boggle my mind that there can be that dichotomy, but we definitely run into it constantly.
But let me also say that the glass isn't always half empty. I think about the work that we did for our client up in Raleigh when we were first getting started, and we couldn't start the project until IT had set up a charge account so that they could bill all of their time to internal audit. There was some real fear that, in addition to the consulting costs of involving Visual Risk IQ in the project, that they'd see some very large internal costs. And we downloaded 2 or 3 years worth of data from Oracle, their ERP system. We downloaded data from their payroll system, which was hosted out with a service provider, a cloud provider. And when the project got closed out, I think there was 4.5 hours that was charged by IT to make these tables available. So it often doesn't take long to make data available for internal audit, but it is not uncommon for us to really wait a seemingly very long time to have data available to us. So that actually brings us, Lindsay, to our first polling question, helping Kim and I direct the webinar time today. Help us understand, are your problems related to data acquisition more organizational or technical challenges, or perhaps equal?
Yes, thanks, Joe. Yes, please be sure to respond to the poll on the screen. You must respond to all 3 polls in order to receive CPE credit. And I'm getting a lot of responses back. It looks like most are they have equal problems. Unfortunately, organizational and technical issues with getting their data. But a lot of them also seem to be more of the organizational variety. Let me see if I can go ahead and close the poll and display the results. There we go. So 50% of the responses were both organizational and technical, with 32% being of the organizational variety.
Okay. Well, good. Well, it's only a single slide. We've got a lot to say here about the organizational challenges, and let us start with really a review of the different ways that internal audit teams can get access to these tables. For those of you that joined the first couple of webinars, you know that Kim and I have been in this business nonstop since 2006. I'll tell you that we use that technique 3 more often than any other technique during our first few years. So I'll actually start at the bottom. What we would do is we would go out and research what are the table names from Oracle or the table names from PeopleSoft or Banner. We'd have a data dictionary, and we would understand what were the tables and columns and rows that we would need to do the audit analytics. We would ask the client IT personnel to download those tables to a removable hard disk. It's usually a couple of $100. Trying to think of some of the first ones we bought. Kim, strikes me as maybe a 500 megabyte Western Digital USB drive, and we would have the client download those table dumps to that portable hard drive. We'd use national shipping service, either FedEx or UPS, and they would ship that hard drive to us, and then we would load the data from the hard drive to our local copy of IDEA or SQL or whatever software we were using, mostly IDEA the first few years. So the idea was that we would specify the data and then have it sent to us. And it was all done really without the benefit of the internet, of cloud, of more modern computer technology. Over the years,
I was going to say that. I was just going to say that when you describe that, and it's so accurate in terms of the way we used to get data when we began, but it sounds like ancient history now. I mean, we just don't do that anymore. And the internet has totally changed that, and secure file transfers in the cloud generally. But that's the way it was. But it's nice. It's a nicer new world now.
Indeed, and I think that same technique, right, providing a written request to IT, having IT prepare the file, and how technology has changed is now maybe they're uploading the file to our secure directory, or they're provisioning some space on the corporate network, and we're logging in via secure method, either us or with our internal audit client, to get the data. The point is that the most common technique that we used years ago and still use today is that it's a written request of the data of an IT professional. The IT professional provides the data, puts it out in a location for us to access. Another common technique, kind of going from the bottom up, is to find a business process owner, right? How does somebody in the controller's office or the finance department prepare journal entries for use by the external auditors? They're familiar with the ERP. They know how to log on to PeopleSoft or Oracle or SAP. They know how to create a spreadsheet for all the journal entries over the last 12 months or 18 or 24 months. So instead of asking IT to prepare the file, we go ask someone within the finance or business process area to create a comma-separated value or a spreadsheet for internal audit, and then have that file provisioned for internal audit. The third technique is becoming more and more common, and that is for a user ID to be created directly for the audit person. And sometimes the audit teams that we're working with have the requisite technical skills to use the ERP report writer to prepare files. Sometimes it's a web-based program. We've helped our audit clients log on to American Express and Bank of America Works and probably a half dozen different bank card systems, and use a web-based report writer to select the columns that we want to export into a CSV file so that we can use IDEA to accomplish our audit objectives. Sometimes it's a more technical report writer like Cognos, IBM's Cognos, which is the data extract tool for the Concur travel and entertainment system. We're very familiar with the People Tools query browser and how to get data out of that ERP. But sort of I'll call technique one a self-service approach, where the auditor creates their own extract file and then compare and contrast that self-service approach in technique one with a involvement of a business process owner in technique two, and then finally the written request to IT folks. Kim, any thoughts on the pros and?
Yeah, I think what I was going to say, Joe, was that particularly as you move, as you learn about the audits that have continuing value to you and the business owners, you want to move more and more, I would hope and expect, to technique one, and because that in the self-service approach, obviously the timing is up to you as an internal auditor, or for that matter, up to the business process owner themselves as to the frequency with which you extract the data and therefore get and have access to your analytics. So the directionality of this, I think, is from the bottom up as you describe them, and the objective, I think, for most internal auditors is technique one, where the timing and of the extract and therefore the availability of the data analysis is on their terms and schedule as opposed to IT's.
Got it. So again, fairly important, 3 different techniques, and we're going to present you with a second polling question here, sort of close to the first one, but again, to help us understand how what is the most common technique used in your organization, and that'll help Kim and I focus our time. What do we do with the extracts once we have them?
Yes, thank you, Joe. What is the most common way you can obtain data for your audit analytics project is our polling question. The different responses are internal extracts directly using Report Writer, business process owner helps extract into CSV or spreadsheet, or do you use a formal written request to IT and then IT prepares the extract? Again, we need to receive responses to all 3 questions in order to receive CPE credit. I will give you another few seconds to go ahead and submit your responses, and then I will display the results.
Super. Thank you, Lindsay.
Yeah. All right, I think that's everybody who's going to respond. Okay, so 48% of the respondents use internal extracts or do their extracts directly with Report Writer. 39%, the business process owner helps extract into a CSV or spreadsheet, and 13% obtain their data through IT.
Super, very, very helpful. Well, again, because this is a focus on data acquisition, we're going to assume that we've gotten past the organizational obstacles. We've got a data file, maybe it's a customer file, maybe it's a vendor file, maybe it's an HR file, and we're going to try and do some matching between names in that file, and we're trying to count the number of sales or donations or maybe expenditures with our customer, John Smith, except we've got 2 John Smiths here, and we're trying to understand, are John with an H the same as John without an H? Is that the same individual? What about John Smith Jr., where Jr. is spelled out? What about with more complex names like Quan Lee or Quan Lee? Same name, same soundex values, which Kim will explain in a moment. Same name, but spelled very differently in the ERP system. Let's say we're trying to match a name of our vendors or names of our customers to the federal denied parties list put out by the Office of Foreign Access Control. OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, says you better not be doing business with Hakeem Saeed if Hakeem Saeed is Hakeem Saeed who defrauded the U.S. government or is a known drug trafficker. You've got an Hakeem Saeed in your master file, but you're not sure if it's the same one or a different one. Same thing here, nicknames, Rob and Bobby, Bobby and Robert. Are those the same individuals, yes or no? So this is a data acquisition or data technical challenge that we have as it relates occasionally to names. I think you can imagine the same kind of questions coming up with addresses. Same thing here. We're trying to identify if the customer at 13455 South 13th Street is in fact the same customer as the third bullet living at the same 13455 South 13th Street. But if I'm asking an Oracle database, is the name on the left the same as the name on the right? Of course, I'm going to get the answer of no, even though from a human perspective, I think most of us can see these address pairs here, and it feels like the answer to those questions are yes, indeed, these are a match. So Kim and I have some code examples to show you how we do some of the transformation for this name matching and address matching using IDEA to do the data acquisition and data preparation that's often needed. Kim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Sorry. I was turning it over to myself. Yeah, I think sometimes we think of acquisition, well, I guess we technically divide it from a phraseology standpoint into acquisition and preparation, but overall the entire exercise I think falls into the category of data preparation. But preparation, we found, involves this important concept of normalization, and sometimes we call it scrubbing also, just to scrub a name or an address or any value from the form in which we get it as we do that acquisition step that we were just talking about, and put it in a form that supports our analytics. And in trying to group things or match them, it's critical that we put everything into a consistent form. So this slide exemplifies a few of those concepts, and we'll look on a slide that follows at some of the IDEA functionality that allows us to do this quite easily. But if you could go back one, Joe, just quickly. I just wanted to go through. So uppercase is one important element. Removing punctuation or special characters or spaces is another important aspect. Consistent spelling, that street name difference between spelling 13th street or spelling out the word 13, or in this example, international versus INTL. You know, when you want to compare two names or two company names or vendor names, you want to make sure that those internal words are either eliminated or consistent. So there's a couple ways. The removing of unnecessary words. So in the first example under that, getting rid of street, because sometimes one system or record might record it as ST, another might record it as a fully spelled out street, another might record it as ST period, another might leave it off accidentally altogether. So we want to be able to compare those. Directionality, W, west. A lot of times in vendor names, you'll see when you get it from a purchase card or travel card, you'll see that the vendor name has like a store number or some, in the case of a airline, a ticket number on it, and you want to remove that ticket number, remove that store number to create the ability to compare and group things. So those types of challenges are what we're looking at doing in what we call data normalization or data scrubbing. And the techniques, which we start to explore on the next slide, are I guess this is a continuation of that thought, and maybe but that last one is different. One of the things that we found to be of value, particularly in the travel area, is to identify group affiliations. Larger organizations have contracts that help them save money when they fly on a particular airline or stay at a particular hotel group. And as you know, and they've sort of consolidated more and more with the recent addition of Marriott to the Starwood group, that as you roll that up, and an organization has an opportunity to reduce their daily rates at a particular hotel group or with a particular airline, it becomes important to be able to understand who is following the policy of using that airline or using that hotel group and who isn't, because the more that you can spend with that particular group out of your organization, the more leverage that you have in terms of negotiating that next contract. I think we have some of the ways that we have within IDEA to use this. And if you're at all familiar with IDEA, which hopefully you are, you're undoubtedly familiar with all of these basic functions. This is a very small part of the overall functionality that you have available in the scripting language of IDEA, but these are in particular useful, and you can see as you just read down the names themselves that you could do the kinds of things that we've just been describing in terms of getting rid of spaces or making it uppercase or replacing one word with another or cutting off only the left or right side. The one down there towards the bottom, Reg EXPR, may be a new one for you, maybe not, but one of the very powerful ways of finding particular words like Starbucks or Delta within a longer string is to use this concept called regular expressions, which is a way of identifying a pattern matching ability that has, like, the word Delta and then any other characters after, without regard to what they are, be a match, and then changing it to just the word Delta. So that is a very powerful way of regularizing or normalizing names. So in the next couple of slides, we actually show some examples of this. So the first one just shows, and I'm not sure how many of you might have done this, but one important capability of IDEA is that you can sort of stack these. So you see that I've stacked in this example of removing spaces and special characters, the replace command, and you sort of read it from the inside out. It's kind of a little bit difficult to do, but we'll do it anyway. So we start in the inside with, what are we acting on? Well, we're acting on first name concatenated with, that's plus a space, concatenated with the last name. In both the first name and last name case, we're taking off all the spaces before and after that first name and before and after that last name with the all trim. And then once we do that, then you can go to the next parentheses, which is to change everything into uppercase. So we're going to take whatever that first name is, and in the example right below that, Kim O. Jones, we would take Kim and O, which I guess I would have to assume I didn't put middle name in there. Let's assume that I put the O in the first name, Kim O, and then a space, and then Jones in the last name, and we would change them all to uppercase. So that got part of the way towards that final answer over there. Then we stripped, and strip is a very powerful command within IDEA that allows you to remove all special characters and spaces from a string, a character-based name. And so what that does, that removed the space between Kim and O, it removed the period, and it removed the space between O and Jones. So that ended up, and then finally, and this applies to the second example, my wife's name is Gloria, and if we happen to have put them both into first name in this case, the word and would be there, and we don't want that to be there. So you can see that replace command replaced the word and you can see there's a space before and after the A-N-D, replaced space A-N-D space with nothing. The quote is single quote is nothing. So that's an example. Script is doing the same thing in the phone number. That's a simple way to make a phone number compressed down, no matter how it's formatted. It could have been 512-692-7663, or as you see it, or it could have even been already formatted down to 10 characters. In all cases, that script command will result in an identically formatted phone number on the right. Let's go on to the next slide, Joe. So this is a more complex example of replace, it really isn't doing anything more than what we just saw. But I wanted to show it because we use this all the time. So this is, as you can see, taking what I called full name. It was really more a vendor name or a company name, and removing or making consistent the words within it. So where they were words that didn't necessarily have importance to the name itself, like corporation or LLC, or you can see there's some foreign examples in there, AG, GmbH, we just remove them. So we change them to nothing. But in other cases, like the word international, which might be an important part of the name itself. So like if it was Visual Risk IQ International, could be part of our actual corporate name, not just a noise word. So in that case, we want to make the spelling consistent. So we change the word international down there towards the bottom into INTL, and then we found some cases where international had a apostrophe between the INT and the L. So we wanted to change that again into a consistent form. So we did that, and services and service, technology, etc. So again, stacking up a series of replaces like this, and you do have to count. In other words, the number of replaces do have to match in the terms of the pairs of things, and the bottom part of this slide do have to match in terms of numbers, but it'll tell you when you don't. So you'll get feedback from IDEA when it doesn't match. But again, a one statement way of taking, in this case, a merchant name or company name, and making it be comparable to another company name that may be, at least in the internal file, spelled slightly differently, but we want to match and we want to group them. Couple more examples, nothing particularly new here, except we're extracting numbers in this case. And this becomes, what we found is that having the capability to extract numbers from a street address, or a street address plus a zip code, or and separately extracting the alphabetic portion of that street address or street address plus zip code is a very, very powerful way of setting up a comparison that has a much higher degree of likelihood of being comparable from one street address to another. And that second example shows that there's a slight difference because of the way that P.O. boxes are typically put in an address. As you can say, you put P.O. box, but you might have periods there. You might just say box 105262. You might have a 9 position or a 5+4 type zip code, or you might have a 5 position zip code. So our consistent standard is to strip zip codes down to 5 positions. And for P.O. boxes, and you can tell it's a P.O. box, we look for the word box somewhere in the street address and declare that it's a P.O. box in that case. And when it's a P.O. box, this is how we strip out the numbers. And this becomes the most important part of the comparison, because the zip code tells us where it is, and the number of the P.O. box tells us the zip code in that, the box number in that zip code. And there is only one box number in that zip code with that number. So that's a unique address. So that gives us a really powerful way of comparing two post office box addresses. And one more example, again, this is replaced. We're looking at this is a street address. And when we go down to the next slide, you'll see that we go down and we're taking out, we're replacing or making consistent all the words in the address. So this is the alpha portion, and I won't go through every one of these, but you can see here's where we're changing first one ST to first. And go ahead. Another important and similar problem is when you have date fields, because date fields, this happens to be an example that came out of one of our another tool that we were working with. We were given dates that were in the form across that top with a 3-position month and a 4-position year, but we needed to change those into more regularized dates the way you're used to seeing them, like month, day, year. And it turns out that, again, IDEA has a very powerful function that we illustrate on the next slide that is called CDate. And as you can see, each of these different forms of dates, the one like we had in that sampled on the previous page, that's 3-position month and a 4-position year, or a more regularized but still alphabetic date, or a more sort of computery looking date, a year dash month dash day, all using CDate change into a date type of format, a data type within an IDEA table, and turn out the way you would expect them. And it inserts that 1 in the first one. So if it's April, it assumes it's the first day of that month. And but very, very powerful function that comes in handy in comparing dates and regularizing them into a consistent form. Finally, we'll touch on what we use quite heavily in normalizing vendor names. And the tools like IDEA have the ability to find pattern matching and to replace single instances of them. What we found in vendors, and particularly as we also add in the group affiliations, is that there are so many different ones. We end up with in the low thousands of names that we want to regularize, that we use this concept called regular expressions. And we want to create a couple of new columns for each vendor. We want to create a normalized, what we call a normalized vendor name or a scrub vendor name. And we also want to identify any group affiliations for that vendor. So what we've done in the work that we do, Joe and I do at Visual Risk IQ, is we've created spreadsheets, and we have one spreadsheet for hotel names and group affiliation. We have another for airline names and affiliations, and we have another sort of miscellaneous. And we matched using regular expression syntax, and I think we may show you a little bit of it on the next slide, but we identify a pattern, and then we identify the standard name into which we want to change it. So Hotel Garden Inn or Hotel INT, Hilton INT, Hilton, and we change it into the name in that third column, and as well we identify the group affiliation there on the far right. So we have extensive spreadsheets that do this kind of pattern matching and identify the values to put into the normalized vendor column, which is that third column there, and the group affiliation, which is the fourth column that you see on this slide. Just quickly, and we happen to use a SQL procedure. We're working with IDEA and Caseware to create the capability within to have what we call a substitution table to allow the same kind of tabularization of changes to occur within IDEA. But for now, we use one of the SQL databases like MySQL, which is a free download from Oracle, or many of you might have SQL Server from Microsoft in your environment and have access to that as internal audit. We're working with a number of organizations that have set up SQL Server databases for internal audit uniquely, and that gives you access to load some of your data into that, or maybe even all of your data into that SQL Server database, and then create procedures similar to this that allow you to loop through the names that you want to change and then match them to the vendors in that particular file, be it a purchase card file or a travel card file or a concur file, and then change them. And the next slide shows the change command, which is just an update that sets the chain code, the hotel chain, the parent of that hotel, and then the vendor name, normalized vendor name to the values that you had in your table. So very powerful, simple, very simple function, but it definitely can help you to create groupings and make valid comparisons between files that were kind of impossible without this kind of matching. Finally, on the concept of parent-child is important. When you get files from purchase and travel card companies, they many times include multiple lines for a given transaction. And one of the things that we talked about was doing control totals. One of the important things early on in data acquisition is to ensure that what you've extracted is what you are looking at auditing. And so the first thing that we do after getting an extract in any of the three techniques that we described is to do some control totals by typically by date, looking to see the audit period is January of 16 to December of 16. Then we look at the totals that we have for all the transactions that we extracted for that period. The unfortunate reality of many purchase card or travel card downloads is that you get multiple lines, multiple rows for each transaction. So you have to have a way of identifying sort of which is what we call the parent row and which is the child row. And so we have some techniques that we use that are exemplified, I think, or at least discussed on the next slide that illustrate ways, techniques, and it's typically via some combination of item and detail descriptions being available or not available, and then we set a record type to either a parent record type or a child record type. And again, this gives you a snippet. It's really not the whole procedure, but anyway. So let me pass it back to Joe. And an important thing that we're trying to avoid with all of this preparation is the issue of false positives, and because that can be a real time consumer in your audit as you get started with your analytics side. Joe, you want to go on to the false positive?
Let me talk for just a second about control totals and the importance of balancing. What I want folks to see here is that if we look at the grand total of the amount field for this cash register receipt at Home Depot, some employee went to the Home Depot store 3625. They bought some paint, some tape, some sandpaper, some hinges, and it looks like they spent $328.40. But if I add up the amount column for every single detail amount on the cash register tape, I'm actually going to be double counting, triple counting. I don't know what the dodeca, quattro counting, the 24 times that the $328 grand total for the receipt is going to be added up to itself. So the routine that Kim described here on slide 32 and 33 is to understand that these detailed descriptions are not are child records related to the parent record of the $328. And when we're computing our control totals, we only want to add the parent records, not the child records, to the grand total. So the last concept we want to have before we wrap up is this notion of understanding and planning for false positives. Again, we've described in some detail some code examples where we might compare John Smith and John Smith, or Quan Lee and Quan Lee, depending on their address or their purchase office box, P.O. box. Are Quan Lee and Quan Lee the same person? And there are two risks. One risk is that we suggest that John Smith and John Smith are two different people, and we're not correctly identifying that our John without the N, without the H, is a match for someone on a federal debarred list. That's a type 1 error. It turns out the real condition is true, that John Smith is a terrorist and we should prevent our company from doing business with him. But because we've not correctly coded for John versus John, we're incorrectly missing the matching criteria. The other type of an error is a false positive, where it turns out that John Smith and John Smith are two different people, different birth date, different addresses, just happen to share the same name. And the problem that we run is if we tell the accounting or procurement people to go do a background check or some other expensive procedure to see that if John Smith and John Smith are definitely different people, we may be causing the company a large cost associated with investigating each of the false positives. With that said, incorrectly permitting John Smith, the terrorist, to get on the airplane because they've spelled their name with John. It could be a very tragic event if the name matching system didn't correctly identify that as a match. So that brings us to our third polling question, and a real piece of advice that we have for everyone on the call today. And the question is, how much emphasis do you spend on false positives and false negatives? Have you planned for the cost of false positives and false negatives as part of your analytics brainstorming and your data acquisition and data normalization processes?
Thanks, Joe. The different answers for the poll are no. You have not planned for the cost of the false positives and the false negatives. Partially yes, you've planned for false positives only, not false negatives. Partially yes, you've planned for false negatives only, not false positives. Yes, you consider the cost of both, or it's not applicable to you because you haven't begun your first data analytics project yet. This is our final polling question. Please be sure to respond so that you can receive your CPE credit. I will give a few more seconds to let everybody submit their response, and then I will display the results. All right. It looks like 17% of you have not been planning for these costs. 9% plan for false positives only. 4% plan for false negatives only. 30% plan for both, and 39% say that it's not applicable to them because they still haven't done their first project.
Okay. Very good. Well, the good news is that for those of us that have made it through 55 minutes here, it looks like we get to influence more than half of you to be sure to calculate the cost of false positives and false negatives when you're beginning your testing. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in. We welcome any additional ones. And again, if we can't cover them before the top of the hour, we'll circle back with folks via email. The key takeaways for today's session are to understand whether your data acquisition and data preparation challenge is organizational or perhaps a technical challenge. Kim walked us through some very detailed idea code and regular expressions and some data transformation that often needs to be done when you're doing analytics. There certainly is a good, better, best notion where you may want to do some of the techniques, but not necessarily all of them. We shared some techniques regarding removing punctuation and spaces and substitutions with the replace statements, but those are just some of the techniques that are needed to do the refinement so that you can do a more thoughtful job of matching, which is such an important part of analytics, whether you're doing revenue cycle testing or expenditure cycle testing. The couple of questions that we've had come in, one was on the use of IDEA's CDate feature. The question is, does the CDate feature automatically recognize the European versus the US date style format? And the good news is yes. IDEA has the ability to both read in and then write out in either month, month, day, day, or day, day, month, month. And there is some basic data acquisition and validation in place. So you get to specify whether the month comes before or after the date. Kim, any other tricks that you wanted to say regarding date calculations before we wrap up? And then there's also a question we had regarding fuzzy match.
Yeah, no, I think you covered the date conversion, and as you indicated, there's the ability to identify a European format versus U.S. format. On the fuzzy question, we found that IDEA's fuzzy matching is quite powerful in the sense that I like the way it groups fuzzy matches and also allows you to specify how rigorous you want the fuzzy match to be. And so it sort of groups them and it allows you to choose whether you want a particular fuzzy match to be available to be matched again, fuzzily, if I can use that word, to another possible row within the data set. But you have to play with it a little bit to understand how you want to answer that question I just posed that you have available to you, and also how rigorous. We've used anywhere from 80% up. I think as you get below 80%, it starts to be a little too fuzzy, but sometimes if you have a kind of a dirty data set that you're really looking to match, then that could be useful. So I think we're real close to the top of the hour now. I didn't see any other questions coming in.
No, the main thing we wanted to do, we appreciate folks that have joined us for the first three of the webinar series. We're going to take a couple of weeks off and reconvene on May 11th. So next Friday, the 28th, we're going to be skipping, and then the May 4th, we're skipping as well. On May 11th, we're going to cover how data analytics, the use of data analytics in analyzing a population should affect the audit reports. What is the output at the end of the audit, and how are we going to incorporate our findings to reflect that we've done population testing instead of sample testing? So invite folks to join in on May 11th for that fourth webinar, and then we'll be closing on May 18th with our guest speaker from East Carolina University, and she'll be talking about how she's incorporated the data-driven approach into their analytics program, really changing their audit methodology, everything from planning to reporting. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we'll
Thanks
talk
very much.
in a couple of weeks. Okay.
Yes, thanks everybody. Have a great afternoon, and we hope to see you in a few weeks. Bye.